On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
Hi, it's Roman Baber on Friday, Shabbat Shalom. We need to win York Center, and for that I need an army of volunteers to help me on Monday, April 28th, to pull our vote and to count our vote at night to make sure that every Conservative vote counts. Please join me on...
That's the voice of Roman Baber, the Conservative candidate in the Toronto area riding of York Centre, in a social media video he issued on the weekend, urging his supporters to come help get out the vote on Election Day, Monday, April 28th. A Jewish group sent his video around by email with a message urging Canadian Jews to vote Baber in rather than Liberal MP and former Cabinet Minister Ayara Sachs, the first Israeli-Canadian ever elected to Parliament. And it just goes to show you that York Centre, which has seen Jewish schools shot at and Jewish businesses firebombed since October 7th, is still a tight race in an important riding with a large Jewish presence. Pollsters say it's still a toss-up, as Sachs is showing a very slight lead over her Conservative challenger. York Centre is one of the important races to watch this election for the Canadian Jewish community, and an estimated 27 Jewish candidates are running from coast to coast in about 10 key ridings which are in focus. They're either going head-to-head, like in York Centre, or in Thornhill, where Deputy Conservative leader Melissa Landsman seems to be a lock to be re-elected against TV producer Leanne Kotler. Sometimes, though, the race has only one Jewish candidate, like the NDP's Bruce Levy in Toronto St. Paul's, who's not expected to win, while Liberal MP Ben Carr in a Winnipeg riding will likely hold on to his seat. In other fascinating races, you've got mostly non-Jewish politicians who are vocal supporters of our community duking it out in ridings with sizable Jewish neighborhoods, such as Eglinton-Lawrence. And you've got a few Jewish candidates running who have supported boycott movements against Israel and pro-Palestinian encampments on university campuses, like the NDP's Avi Lewis in Vancouver Centre and Dr. Samantha Green in Toronto Centre. For most of this election campaign, our coverage has been on the big picture: who best can stand up to U.S. President Donald Trump's trade war, and also which party's likely to push back against anti-Semitism here since October 7th and rebuild Canada's support for the State of Israel. But at the riding level, there's been plenty of news impacting Jewish candidates too. And now we've seen influential Orthodox rabbis in Montreal and Toronto start urging people to vote only Conservative. So you need a scorecard to keep track of this as we head to the polls, but don't worry, we've got you covered. I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Monday, April 28th, 2025. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, and made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. For the last 5 weeks, if you've been listening or reading, the CJN has been talking to Jewish voters, to the main Jewish candidates, and to the candidates who aren't Jewish but are running in ridings with sizable Jewish neighborhoods. And so on today's episode, we're going to dive deep into a couple of key races in Montreal and Toronto and unpack some of the controversies, the color, and some behind-the-scenes events that have shaped how the election might play out. And to do that, I'm joined by the CJN's correspondents Joel Ceausu in Montreal and Jonathan Rothman in Toronto, who are here to share some of their insights from covering the 5-week campaign and discuss who's likely to win. And they join me now. So we're going to do a really deep dive into some of the most interesting ridings that are interest to our community. The most Jewishy ridings in Canada are Thornhill, 30%, Mount Royal, 21%, give or take.
Higher than that.
Higher than that. Eglinton-Lawrence is number 3. York Centre is number 4 in the list of the top Jewish populations, right? Then there's Toronto St. Paul's, Outremont, NDG Westmount, Winnipeg South Centre, Pierrefonds Dollard, and Don Valley West. all of these guys are in your hoods. So let's bring in Joel first. You covered the Mount Royal riding campaign with the two main candidates, Anthony Housefather and Neil Oberman. They've literally been campaigning way before the election was dropped. This has been a year at least, right?
It's a soft campaign, an officially quiet campaign for a year. But to be truthful, Anthony Housefather campaigns the day after he's elected. He's relentless, and that's the energy he has, and that's why he's going for a fourth round.
Tell us a little bit about some of the controversies that have come up in this campaign.
Well, it's been nasty and dirty in the sense that Neil Oberman has capitalized on a lot of the anger and betrayal felt by Canadian Jews here in Montreal, in Mount Royal, regarding the Liberals' pivot away from traditional support for Israel and what they see as indifference to anti-Semitism, which, as you know, in Montreal, like Toronto and some other major North American cities, are seeing regular, demonstrations, a couple of hate fests here and there.
You had riots. Concordia got their windows smashed. McGill
we got their windows smashed. We've had demonstrations outside synagogues, violating injunctions in full plane within meters of Montreal police who have done nothing. The anger is being directed towards Valérie Plante, the mayor of Montreal, and as well as the federal government, because many people believe that if the tone was set differently at the top, that the message would be delivered that this type of behavior is not acceptable, and that police can use the powers they have to enforce the laws that already exist on the books and not being used. Now, that said, Neil Oberman, who was campaigning, pretty regularly and softly, as you pointed out correctly earlier, on a host of issues about the economy, about jobs, about immigration, housing. But at the same time, this anger that's welling up in the Jewish community, that sense of betrayal, that reached a pinnacle, I'd say, in the fall. And we saw a lot of that diffused when Trudeau took a hike, and that the Liberal Party would see a change at the top. So that diffused a lot of the anger, and a lot of what I saw is the Liberals who were considering voting Conservative. They went back to their traditional home. Although I'm speaking with a lot of traditional Liberals, many who I saw sitting in the Beth Israel, Beth Aaron synagogue last year, wide-eyed and welcoming Pierre Poilievre into the riding. So not everybody's convinced, but the nastiness is coming mostly at the hands of surrogates. While Oberman, who's been dubbed the Doberman because he has a very gruff manner about him, he doesn't pull punches, but at the same time, he's running not a very multifaceted campaign. He's really, his messages are few, but they're very clear and they're very forceful. But at the same time, Anthony Housefather has really been pushing his record, having served as MP 3 times and mayor 3 times, as about minority language rights, English rights, Anglophone rights. And that's something that's unique in Canada, where that's Jews in Montreal, English-speaking Jews are a minority within a minority. So there's that double concern. But again, Mount Royal is not even a third Jewish. And so it's the Jews, while we make a lot of noise and there's a lot being said, and both leading candidates are Jews, it's not a Jewish riding per se, and it's not a Jewish election, because there are some 15,000 Filipinos in the riding, and then there's the entire municipality of TMR, Town of Mount Royal, which has a few Jews, but not many. So these issues are kind of confined to the western part of the riding, where it's anticipated that the Conservatives will do very well. They may take both Côte-Saint-Luc and Hampstead. Interestingly, the mayors of both those towns have been actively campaigning for their respective candidates. Mitch Brownstein in Côte-Saint-Luc, known supporter, longtime friend of Anthony Housefather, and Jeremy Levi, and the mayor of Hampstead, who has been dubbed the most hated mayor in America. That's how far his reach gets on social media, talking about the Liberal government's failures and how supportive he is of the Conservatives. But at the same time, while there's been a lot of criticism aimed at Housefather from critics like Levi, he points out, and it should be mentioned, that early on last year, when he started criticizing the Liberal government and its response to the war and to the anti-Semitism in the streets, he said, "I will support anybody who runs for the Conservatives, and I hope it's Anthony Housefather." he rejects some of the criticism that he's an attack dog on Anthony, and I think that's fair.
We have to remember, our listeners will remember, March 18th of 2024, Anthony was going to quit the party after the vote on Palestine, and then he didn't, and everyone's like, that's it. Anthony, you need to leave. You're in the wrong party. We can't support you anymore because you are staying with the people you voted against. Why was there a controversy in the campaign, in that riding, about who Irwin Cotler is supporting?
Well, Irwin Cotler's got, marquee value wherever he goes. And the fact that, the former Liberal cabinet minister, Nobel Prize nominee, he's a star here in the riding. He's a former MP. I think he served 4 terms.
In this riding.
And he preceded Anthony. And Anthony Housefather is known for advertising and publicizing all his endorsements for whoever they're coming from. And he posted something on social media with a quote from Irwin Cotler praising him as the man of the hour. I'm not clear if that was a current endorsement or a past endorsement, just repeatedly posted again for this election cycle. And then Neil Oberman showed up on social media putting a lawn sign on Irwin's lawn with Ariella Cotler, Irwin's wife. And so there was a whole back and forth. Nobody's speaking about this. People are laying off it in a very polite way, which I'm kind of happy to see that on some things they'll lay off on where the dividing line is in the Cotler household. Because there's a lot of people who really don't care. I will tell you that, what is interesting is in the Cotonej area where I told you there's a very sizable Filipino community. There is a very large, prominent red Anthony Housefather poster sticking on the front of the building of the Filipino Community Center in Montreal. So that might tell you, where that community is looking to park their votes again.
I know there was like a controversy about the debate, whether there was going to be a debate or there wasn't going to be a debate. Give us the background, and I want you to just sort of set it up for us.
B'nai B'rith, as they do, sets up debates between candidates and presents some issues of importance to the Jewish community at every election cycle. I know that you had, I think, 2 in Toronto with Yara Sachs and Roman Baber, and the other one,
Karen Stintz and Vince Gasparo, was it?
Okay, and anyway, here the story was that B'nai B'rith asked both candidates that they be available. Neil Oberman's campaign responded with 13 available dates, and Anthony Housefather responded that he was not available. So therefore, B'nai B'rith publicly stated, or they posted on their X account, that because the Liberal candidate could not fit it into his schedule, there would be no debate. Now, that outraged a lot of people. No politician worth his salt will accept a debate if he believes he's in the lead and he has everything to lose and nothing to gain. But I asked Anthony Housefather why he wouldn't agree to a debate. He said, every event is judged based on its merit, and that was our decision going forward.
Sold us. He doesn't like debating other Jewish people. He's never wanted to be head-to-head with Melissa Lantzman or anybody else.
But bringing it back to this, you're talking about the Corner Booth podcast, those two old guys, Bill Brownstein and Aaron Rand, who do this podcast sponsored by the Gazette. They do it at Snowden Deli. It's called the Corner Booth. And they bring some interesting characters in, and they have them pose in front of smoked meat and knishes, and they asked them questions. So this was very interesting in that Anthony Housefather and Neil Oberman showed up, squeezed in at a table side by side between the two guys, bookending them, and they shot some questions at them. And it was interesting. There was some fireworks because Oberman was relentless, criticizing Housefather and the government. And Housefather was taken aback by how forceful Oberman was presenting his case.
Here, let me play you this of Oberman going after Anthony on that podcast.
So when the government of Canada says, for example, most recently, our new prime minister, Israel, turn the lights on. There's a genocide there. Mixed messaging, unacceptable, because what it does, it creates a problem. I want to also say something. A bunch of people in Ottawa run around, they enforce it with the Emergency Measures Act. They freeze their bank accounts, they put them in jail. Whether they're right or wrong, I'm not here to discuss it. For 18 months, people run across our country, block our students from going to school, can't get into the metro, block businesses. What has the government done? Nothing, and nothing.
Okay, Anthony,
they do nothing.
How do you respond?
Mr. Carney clearly, unequivocally yesterday said that he did not
say that Israel was committing genocide. He said it the day after, he didn't hear, and then yesterday he made it even clearer that he was not suggesting that, he would never politicize that word.
And at some points, Anthony Housefather was just fed up, and he said, "This is not a nice discussion. This is getting insulting," and he felt it was not a discourse that was conducive to a fruitful discussion. But Oberman also made clear, he says he had great respect for Housefather and how hard he worked, but he's just making the point that it doesn't matter because the party doesn't care. It's the Liberal Party.
There was some kind of dirty tricks with Oberman and Anthony about whether Anthony was at a private meeting for doctors and said he supported Hamas or something. What was that about?
At that event, he was questioned on Global Affairs Canada announcement in March of $100 million for Gaza and the West Bank, and they pushed him and pressed him on how they would get what assurances there would be that this money didn't end up in cement for tunnels or in the hands of people responsible for the slaughter of Jews. And they weren't satisfied with his response, which essentially was that there are mechanisms in place to make sure that this money gets to where it has to, and the money will be audited. And then some social media activity circulated saying that he was in support of terrorism. He never said that. In either case, it was incorrect. But it kind of disappeared as fast as it came out. It lasted about a week.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
It just goes to show you that in Montreal, they do things a certain way. I want to bring in Jonathan because in the GTA, it's not all roses either. And so I want to hear what's the key riding you want to talk about.
St. Paul's is a riding that we covered in the Ontario election about Jewish voters voting strategically. And it votes Liberal and NDP provincially and has mostly been a Liberal stronghold federally. Was Carolyn Bennett's for the neighborhood of 2 decades, and until she stepped down, which is why there was a by-election last year, and that's when the Conservatives took over. And we heard a lot of different comments about not being able to vote because they didn't want to support the Conservative because they're too lefty for that, to people who had never voted Conservative before, shifting from a more Liberal or NDP span of base. And in both cases, we've seen a lot of meet and greets and a lot of mobilization on the ground to get out the vote for whichever of the two candidates Jewish voters are kind of trying to position into the lead. So
okay, let's just resume the names.
So the 2-horse race, even though neither of them are Jewish, is Don Stewart, who's been holding the seat for the Conservatives since the by-election win last year, which was only about 630 votes difference, something like that, that he beat Leslie Church. And so now Leslie Church is slightly ahead in the polls, I believe. The Liberals appear to be poised to take back the riding in this rematch. However, as different people pointed out in my story about how Jewish voters are thinking differently about their vote or voting strategically since October 7th. They can't support anyone but the Conservatives. They can't support the NDP anymore. Different kinds of threads there. One thing that was in the also in the CBC story that you were in, Ellen, I thought there was a great quote from a rabbi there. I believe it was Rabbi Grover, who said that there was almost this sort of intense community pressure that if you're not voting blue, what the heck are you doing? Because look where we've been with the Liberals and et cetera. And that was a sentiment that, while it wasn't the heartbeat of the story I did, it is a shift that took place. And then with what we witnessed since January, what one of the experts, Meyer Semioticki, called a political earthquake that rumbled since Trudeau.
Trumpled.
Trudeau trumpled and then carnified. So
Listen, you mentioned something about the
Yes.
guild, like the Jewish guild. I got a post on Friday. 20 rabbis, Orthodox rabbis from Toronto, are urging their congregation. I don't know if you saw it, but it's going around wild on social media. You must vote Conservative. We're working with the Conservative candidates, including Don Stewart, to change the child benefit program so larger families will get a disproportionate more money. And in Montreal, Joel, did you see what the Jewish Council, Rabbi? So tell us how unusual is that, and who do they represent?
Yeah, the Vadair, the Jewish Community Council in Montreal, that's Rabbi Saul Emanuel, put out a statement endorsing Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. They've been quite vocal over the last year and a half, in fact, mostly condemning some of the, the violence and the rhetoric aimed towards the Jewish community and inaction on the part of authorities in responding to it. But they came out clearly, this is 2 weeks ago, with a statement, as well as a videotaped clip from Rabbi Emanuel. I'll let you play it, and it kind of explains itself.
Pierre Poilievre has shown time and again that he understands what's at stake for our safety, our dignity, and the future of Jewish life in Canada. We remember who stood with us when it mattered most, and now we can all make a difference. I'm proud to support Pierre Poilievre, and I urge you to do the same. Thank you.
But it's unusual that, you're getting it from the pulpit now.
To be fair, most Jews I know don't associate Rabbi Emanuel with the pulpit. They see it as an organization.
They're an MK kosher, we should mention.
So those who are more observant or more affiliated may feel more affected or may have paid more attention. And this happens in every election at every level of government, whether it's as overt as a statement from the Bima, or as a newsletter or a video clip on social media. That we can argue for the sake of heaven for that. But
right.
What I hear from voters is a lot, how could you, like sometimes it's the same sentiment. How could you vote for anyone but blue, given, where we're at? And at the same time, there are other pockets where it's a sort of politically homeless Jews on the left said, that the Jewish NDP vote is essentially going to be evaporated.
In Toronto, St. Paul's, your guy, Bruce Levy, is running for the NDP, and he is Jewish.
That's right.
All the people that we're talking about in that riding are not Jewish running for the Jewish vote. He is Jewish. He's a former diplomat.
We haven't had a Canadian election like this in, something like 100 years, where it's like something like 80% of the, total vote share is going to go to one of the two big parties. So that's shaping a lot of how people are going to blow with the wind, or how people are going to go with the way the wind blows.
How does this change anything? If the Liberals win, what do you see going forward? Like, what happens to the Jewish community now? Are they going to be homeless if the Conservatives don't get in because they put all their eggs in the wrong basket?
Even Mitch Brownstein, who was Anthony Housefather's loudest advocate as mayor of Côte St. Luc, which is about 55% Jewish, said it really doesn't matter what party. It's about Anthony. It's about him. But not every candidate has that kind of loyalty and that support, and grew up in the area and served publicly for so long. So I think you're going to see more of the same. I know that's not a very satisfactory answer, but I think that is what that's the fate that awaits Jewish voters who are not happy with the outcome tomorrow night.
Yeah, there are a couple races that I think are interesting in terms of Jewish candidates. Obviously, Evan Solomon is running in a riding where there's no incumbent right now, but there's actually another Jewish candidate for the NDP, Dr. Samantha Green. And that's one of two Toronto ridings, either with Jewish candidates or a high Jewish population, or that doesn't have an incumbent. So Eglinton-Lawrence being the other one, because of Marco Mendicino stepping down.
Right, but you got to tell everybody about the Samantha Green's anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian background.
This is part of the NDP's perception that, and in many cases, alignment, like Avi Lewis, like Samantha Green, with, more of sort of the independent Jewish voices, political alignment of on Israel, that several of them, Avi Lewis at least, I'm not sure about Green, signed on to, the Vote Palestine pledge that so many people were signing on to, that now, when I reported it was at least 230. I think I've heard it's now more than 300.
Yeah, it's mostly Greens and NDPs, a few, liberals.
In one other place, rather, in Toronto, where there's a Jewish incumbent, is Julie DeBruze in I think it's Toronto.
No, Danforth, yeah.
Danforth, rather. Thank you.
She voted with her party March 18th, as Yara did, as Karina Gould did, to condemn Israel and arms embargo. It's interesting you talked about the NDP and the traditional home of lefty Jews. In Nanaimo Ladysmith in BC, a Toronto-born Jewish lawyer, international lawyer,
Right.
Tamara Cronus, is running for the Conservatives. They all ran before in 2021, so it's exactly the same people. But Paul Manley, he used to be an NDP. They wouldn't have him anymore because he's anti-Israel. So now he's running for the Greens. His father was on this ship called the Estelle in 2012 that tried to break the illegal, quote unquote, blockade of Gaza by Israel, and he was arrested and put in prison. They were complaining that Canada didn't do anything to get him out of an Israeli jail. So this is the sort of background that our listeners may not know about this guy. We don't want him to get in. And so you mentioned Dr. Samantha Green. Didn't she give a hard time to Evan Solomon at the recent all candidates debate about this? Or somebody was yelling at him from the audience. What's your position on Palestine? What's your position on... So it's become an issue in all these writings.
Right. And that Palestine platform, but Samir Zuberi and Pierre Fond-Dollard, of course, signed on to that.
And there's a Jewish woman running in that.
Yeah, the conservative candidate in Pierre Fond-Dollard is Tanya Toledano, a very popular city councillor and a blogger. She's putting up a very energetic campaign, but again, the numbers, the demographics don't bear out a conservative victory there. Samir Zuberi, he's going for his third term. He's had a complicated history. He's associated with the Netanyahu riots of 2002. Montreal Jews remember that last March during the vote on the NDP motion, which he voted in favor of, there was, he was caught on camera throwing a cute little heart gesture across the chamber to his NDP keffiyeh-clad NDP colleagues, and people remembered that. And they also noted that it wasn't until after the CJN contacted his office for a comment about the second firebombing of a synagogue in his riding that he came out with a public statement about it. Now, that could be coincidence. I don't know. But at the same time, these are the challenges of other liberal caucus members who have substantial Jewish constituencies, to have to defend this notion of the big tent of the Liberal Party. And that they have to, there's a lot of different opinions on how they approach these issues. But it looks like Samir Zuberi will probably win a third term there.
Even in Ottawa, I was reading our colleagues at the Ottawa Jewish Bulletin. So we have a Jewish candidate running, Bertha Fuchsman-Small, Dr. Bertha Fuchsman-Small. She's a retired physician from Montreal, originally Côte-de-Neige. And she's running in Argenteuil-la-Petite-Nation, which is in Gatineau, right across from the national capital. The community had like a round table with all the different candidates. And Jenna Suds signed the Palestine Pledge. The Ottawa Jewish community wasn't happy about it. This is for Canada. And then conversely, a candidate in Canada who's not Jewish, but speaks Hebrew, spent time working for Magen David Adom in Israel, named Greg Kung. They want him to get in Ottawa because he didn't sign the pledge, although Joel Harden did of Ottawa, and people don't like him either. Even though we're looking at Jewish issues, we're also looking, I think, in writings about if we're not going to have a Jewish person representing us, who do we not want? I think is that fair? Is what you're hearing too?
I would say.
Yeah.
I do see a lot of that playing out with the strategic vote in Davenport to support Julie Zarowitz can be the least worst option, right? They're really upset with this NDP candidate in particular that hasn't met with them. And that started, was one of the people that started Davenport for Ceasefire, which is...
What's her name?
Cassandra Souza, rather, is the NDP candidate. And then they just had a debate. And one of the questions was about, meeting with people and hearing from people who have different perspectives than you. And she was heckled by some of the Jewish constituents who are upset that she kept changing the reason or the terms of how they could meet or couldn't meet, or it started with they wanted to have a meeting with a group, and then they said, well, just bring a few people, don't bring 10. And then they said, well, because of the amount of space. And then on the social media, you see they had a big campaign party. There were dozens of people in the space. So they didn't like that. They offered to host it in a library or something else. Then she turned around and said, well, why don't we do individual one-on-one phone calls? So then at the debate, when she said, I've learned a lot from speaking with people I don't agree with, they all heckled her and said, you're a liar. So
If I could just add, I find it very interesting that I know, my colleagues in Toronto are more aware of this, obviously, of course, with the whole Yara Sachs posing with Mahmoud Abbas issue, that, most Montrealers wouldn't know Yara Sachs if they tripped over her, but they do know Melanie Joly. And that photo of the three of them, it really makes it so apparent of how much this was an actual selfie. This was something to be proud of. Now, a lot of Montreal Jews are not listening to the Yara Sachs explanation of that, but this was meant to demonstrate something. And so that kind of that 2 degrees of separation from Yara Sachs is caused a lot of anger here as well, because it was filtered right through Melanie Joly, who famously told, as reported by Tom Mulcair, why her party votes the way they do in her statements. Have you seen her demographics? And if you see her demographics in Ahuntsic-Cartierville, it explains there's no strong pro-Israel sense of Hamisha feeling there in Ahuntsic-Cartierville for the Jews.
So to end off, we could have the following scenario. We could have Mark Carney with a Jewish-friendly chief of staff, Marco Mendicino, in the Liberals, or we could have Pierre Poilievre with Melissa Lantsman as deputy prime minister.
So from above, from a macro sense, the Jews are all right, is what you're saying. It's when you get granular that you start to feel uncomfortable, depending where you're coming from.
Like Anthony always said, and other people have always said, we have to put it shouldn't be a partisan issue. The Jewish safety shouldn't be a partisan issue. It should be an all-party issue. So you're saying maybe we shouldn't worry so much.
On the other hand, if you believe the hype and some of the coverage and some of the social media, people are, making their escape plans and, looking into going to Israel if we wind up with another liberal government.
Or Florida. A lot of...
Or Florida.
moving to... No, there was like a whole event.
I think that's a legitimate sentiment. I think a lot of people poo-poo on that and dismiss that as just histrionics. But I think there is a fair number. I wouldn't say it's the majority by any sense, but there are people who are very concerned. I mean, the environment in which you live, in which from the time you wake up and leave your home till you get through your school or work day in Montreal can be very affected if you're a Jew, especially if you're visibly Jewish. And that's no joke. People never imagined would be on their radar as a daily concern. So this is still a learning curve for the chosen people.
I mean, it seems like one of the things that there's been a real shift in the ground beneath us about things like this, that there are impacts that we wouldn't have seen coming, even if we've been seeing someone like Poilievre campaign for the last, the better part of 2 years.
It doesn't make sense politically. The calculus of votes for Poilievre to be so supportive of the Jews in Israel. It makes no sense. The numbers don't make sense. It doesn't serve him politically. So it's hard to be cynical about that. But what you said about the ground shifting, Jonathan, is an excellent point. These are new issues for this generation, and therefore I think we need to cut ourselves a little bit of slack until it's figured out, until that ground stops shifting and everybody gets a stable footing to really push the metaphor.
And I think we should just take inspiration from the candidate who's running for the Rhinoceros Party.
Always. And you got a Jewish rhino.
There's no nothing that says that he is, but his name that he's running under is Santa Claus Chatham, and he goes around in a Santa Claus costume. He's a young guy. You have to make Christmas, every day is Christmas. You have to abolish gravity and then bubble wrap everyone. Speaking of bubble legislation, we have to bubble wrap. So I thought maybe that's a Jewish issue. We could, interview him if he gets elected. And I thought that was for Waterloo. Santa Claus Chatham. Okay, so anyway, on that note, I know Jonathan and Joel have lots of reporting to do within minutes after the polls close and we get the results. So thank you very much for sharing your on-the-ground reporting.
You are very welcome.
Thanks for having us, Ellen.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily, made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Gronowski-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Except in a couple of spots in Western Canada, the Liberals seem to be poised to win most of the other ridings with leading Jewish candidates, which means MP Marty Morantz's Conservative seat could be lost, and the Liberals might take the seat away from the anti-Israel Winnipeg area NDP MP Leah Gazin. Meanwhile, in BC, two Jewish Conservatives are making a strong run. In Richmond East Stevenson, challenger Zach Siegel's taking on the incumbent Liberal Parm Bains, and in Nanaimo, Ladysmith, Tamara Cronus is favored to unseat the NDP. So buckle up, folks. Follow our post-election coverage on the CJN.ca. Our show is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman and Andrea Varsany. The executive producer is Michael Freeman, and the managing editor is Mark Weisblatt, and our music is by Dov Beck-Levine. Thanks for listening.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, Not Long Ago, Not Far Away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.